The year was 452. The Western Roman Empire was teetering on the edge of collapse. Political instability, economic decline, and waves of barbarian invasions had eroded its strength. And now, a new and terrifying force had arrived. The Huns, led by Attila. Their campaign through northern Italy was brutal. Cities were burned to the ground, homes destroyed, and entire populations forced to flee. Survivors abandoned everything they knew, heading toward the Adriatic coast in search of safety. Offshore, scattered across a shallow lagoon, lay dozens of small, muddy islands. These were not places anyone would normally choose to live. The ground was soft and unstable, the air damp and salty, and there was no source of fresh water. But what they lacked in comfort, these islands offered in protection. The surrounding waters were too shallow for large ships to navigate, making them nearly unreachable for invading armies. Here, the refugees could build a new life, free from the constant threat of attack. It was on these unlikely scraps of land that the foundations of Venice were laid. At first, life was primitive. Small wooden huts sat precariously on the shifting mud, and fishing was the main source of food. But the settlers were resourceful. They began to experiment with ways to build stronger, more permanent structures that could withstand the lagoon's unstable ground. Over time, their ingenuity transformed the marsh into one of the most impressive feats of engineering in history. The key to Venice's survival and eventual rise to power was its foundation. The islands were composed mostly of soft clay, incapable of supporting the weight of stone buildings. The solution came in the form of timber piles, enormous wooden stakes, harvested from forests in what is now Croatia. The Venetians transported these logs across the Adriatic and drove them deep into the ground, about 5 meters down, until they reached a denser layer of clay. Thousands of piles would be driven into a single building site, packed tightly together to compress the surrounding soil. This process squeezed out water and created a stable base. Once the piles were in place, workers cut their tops level and laid wooden planks over them to spread the load. On top of these planks, they placed heavy blocks of Istrian stone, a type of limestone uniquely resistant to water and salt. This raised the foundation above the tide line and provided a durable surface for construction. One of the most remarkable aspects of this system was its longevity. Buried beneath water and deprived of oxygen, the timber piles did not rot. Even today, after more than 1,000 years, many of the original piles remain intact, silently holding up Venice's streets and palaces. With stable foundations in place, the settlers could begin constructing proper buildings. Initially, wood was the material of choice, but repeated fires pushed the Venetians toward brick. Their buildings had to be light, no more than 3 stories high, to avoid placing too much strain on the foundations. Instead of rigid cement, they used lime mortar, which was slightly flexible and could absorb the slow shifts of the ground below. The walls themselves were built with careful consideration. Inner walls often had a crisscrossing pattern of bricks, acting like a trellis that could bend slightly without cracking. Facade walls, however, were heavier, often decorated with ornate stonework and large windows. To prevent these from toppling forward, they were anchored with long iron rods fixed into the building's base. This combination of flexibility and strength allowed Venice to grow steadily, island by island. In the early centuries, movement between islands was mostly by boat. Canals acted as streets, with small wooden docks connecting homes and marketplaces. As the city expanded, the gaps between islands narrowed, and in some places people could cross the shallows on foot or horseback. For centuries, there were no permanent bridges. But by the High Middle Ages, as the population grew and commerce flourished, this began to change. The need for bridges became urgent in the Rialto area, which had emerged as the city's commercial and financial hub. The first bridge across the Grand Canal was a simple pontoon structure, later replaced by a wooden bridge. But wood was vulnerable. The bridge burned down and even collapsed under heavy use. Eventually, the Venetians built a stone bridge that would stand for centuries. The Rialto Bridge, constructed with over 12,000 timber piles and 10,000 tons of stone, it became one of the city's defining landmarks. Its arch allowed ships to pass beneath, while pedestrians crossed above, linking to halves of the city seamlessly. As more stone bridges appeared, Venice's unique urban layout took shape, a dense network of canals and pedestrian paths. Unlike other medieval cities, Venice had no crowded, chaotic streets filled with carts and animals. Water traffic handled the movement of goods, while footpaths served the people. This separation made Venice unusually efficient and allowed trade to flow freely. By the late Middle Ages, Venice had become a maritime powerhouse. Its strategic location at the crossroads of Europe and the East meant that nearly all goods passing between these worlds flowed through Venetian markets. Spices, silks, precious metals, everything was bought and sold here. The city grew wealthy beyond imagination, but with wealth came challenges, and one of the greatest was fresh water. Surrounded entirely by seawater, Venice had no rivers, no natural springs, and no aqueducts from the mainland. In the city's early days, fresh water was delivered by boat from nearby rivers. From the beginning, each neighborhood was organized around a central square, originally just open land for markets or livestock. Engineers transformed these squares into enormous rainwater collection systems. First, they dug out large basins beneath the square, lining the walls with thick clay to make them waterproof. Then they filled these cavities with layers of sand and gravel. The square's surface was paved with stone tiles sloped toward drains at each corner. When it rained, water flowed into the drains, percolated through the sand and gravel, and collected in a central well. The sand acted as a natural filter, removing impurities. To maximize collection, rooftops around the square were fitted with gutters that directed runoff into the system. Over time, more than 600 such wells were built across Venice, turning the entire city into a giant water harvesting machine. This innovation solved one crisis, but another loomed: waste management. In the city's early centuries, waste disposal was simple and unpleasant. Those who lived beside canals simply dumped their refuse directly into the water. Those who didn't tossed it into the streets. Human waste, rotting food, and garbage piled up, creating a health hazard. By the 16th century, the Venetians had built an underground waste removal system. Tunnels ran beneath buildings, collecting waste from latrines and chutes. When the lagoon's tide was low, liquid waste flowed into the canals, while solids settled at the bottom of the tunnels. As the tide rose, seawater flooded the tunnels, lifting the solids and sweeping them into the canals. The twice-daily movement of the tide naturally flushed the system. The salty water acted as a disinfectant, keeping disease at bay and the streets relatively clean. Through all these innovations, Venice thrived. Its merchants dominated Mediterranean trade, its shipyards built some of the most advanced vessels of the time, and its political influence stretched across the Adriatic and into the eastern Mediterranean. And yet, the city never forgot the precariousness of its foundations. Every building, every bridge, every square was the result of careful adaptation to an environment most would have found uninhabitable. What is perhaps most extraordinary is how much of Venice's original engineering still survives today. The same timber piles driven into the mud over 1,000 years ago still support its palaces. The bridges, canals, and wells remain largely unchanged. Beneath the tourist-filled streets and gondola-lined waterways lies an intricate system of human ingenuity, born from desperation and perfected through centuries of adaptation. Venice began as a refuge for the desperate, a cluster of wooden huts in a swamp. But through determination, creativity, and engineering brilliance, it became one of the richest and most powerful cities in Europe, a city that seemed to float on water, yet was rooted firmly in human will. Even today, as it faces new challenges from rising seas and mass tourism, Venice remains a testament to what people can achieve when they refuse to surrender to the limits of their environment.